shopping mall in Los Angeles gathered many people's attention at once. A blonde woman, adorned from head to toe in a Juicy Couture velour tracksuit and $400 Ugg boots, sat on a bench, smirking and laughing with her friends as she spotted a Japanese man eating a convenience store sandwich. However, just a few weeks later, entirely different words flowed from her mouth inside the cold philosophical confines of a prison. Hannah's voice trembled as she looked at the man in a suit who appeared before her, dressed in prisoner's clothes in despair. The very person she had dismissed as a beggar just weeks ago now stood as the only one who might be her last hope. If you're curious about the surprising story published in the Los Angeles Times, please press the subscribe button. Also, let me know in the comments where you are watching the video. October 2000. Los Angeles, still reeling from the aftermath of the bubble burst, was overflowing with entrepreneurs. Despite the shock of the NASDAQ index plummeting from 5,000 points to 2,000, the high-end shopping malls of Beverly Hills were still full of luxury goods. People lined up, happily paying $3.50 for a venti latte at Starbucks, and $60 polo shirts flew off the shelves at Abercrombie. The economy was shaky, but the spending of the rich did not stop. That day, a man sat quietly on a bench near the entrance of the shopping mall. Ryuichi Kenzaki, 31. At 30, he observed the passersby while slowly tearing and eating a $2 sandwich bought at a convenience store. Though he wore old cotton pants and a faded shirt, his gaze was deeper and sharper than expected. From the way he occasionally nodded at the conversations of passing businessmen or peeked at the headlines of the Wall Street Journal, one could sense something out of the ordinary. Faint traces of a Rolex watch remained on Ryuichi's wrist. The $30,000 Daytona, which he had worn just a year ago, had long since been sold for cash. However, he made no attempt to hide it. Rather, it was a mark that reminded him of who he once was. The stock prices are falling again. It really seems like it's over this time. Ryuichi's lips slightly curved upward at the mixed voice of a passing businessman. He had already predicted Enron's accounting fraud for 6 months. To him, once known as the Midas of Wall Street for handling billions of dollars, such signs were as clear as the palm of his hand. The hiding of debt through special purpose entities, the inflation of gas pipeline values, and the abuse of mark-to-market accounting. Everything unfolded just as he had predicted. Ryuichi recalled the past while eating his sandwich. Just 2 years ago, he was the vice president of Goldman Sachs' Asia Investment Division. After graduating with honors in economics from the University of Tokyo, he went on to Harvard Business School for his MBA and then stepped into Wall Street, quickly becoming a rising star in the investment industry. His eye for finding hidden gems in Asian markets was godlike. If Vice President Kenzaki picks it, it's a guaranteed hit. Such words circulated among his colleagues. In fact, the Taiwanese semiconductor company he discovered saw its stock price skyrocket 15 times in 3 years, and a small Singaporean logistics company grew into the largest enterprise in Southeast Asia. His portfolio's annual return rate exceeded 40%, and Wall Street called him the Oriental with the golden hands. However, all glory collapsed in an instant in March 2000. As the NASDAQ hit its peak and began to crash, Ryuichi had still gone all in on tech stocks. He believed in the infinite growth potential of companies. He persevered until companies like PZ, Common Web, Easy collapsed one after another. This is just a temporary adjustment. The internet revolution is unstoppable. Until then, Ryuichi was full of confidence. However, the market completely overturned his expectations. In a single day, the $1.5 billion fund he managed shrank to $300 million, and investors sorry." However, he did not listen to his boss until the end and resigned. His pride wouldn't allow it. But from that moment on, his downfall accelerated. Wall Street began calling him the biggest loser of the dot-com bubble, and no investment firm would hire him. His penthouse in the Upper East Side, a symbol of Manhattan, was quickly repossessed. When he moved from a luxury apartment with an $8,000 rent to a small room in Brooklyn with an $800 rent, Ryuichi tasted despair for the first time. His Mercedes-Benz was sold to a used car dealer for a pittance, and dozens of his Armani suits headed to a secondhand store. But there was another, truly devastating shock. The hateful glares of the people who had trusted him and even entrusted him with their personal savings. $1 million deposited by the pastor of the Japanese Association for Church Building Funds. $100,000 saved by Mr. Tanaka, who ran a Japanese supermarket for his children's education. $50,000 in retirement savings for Mr. Sato, who ran a dry cleaners, all turned to dust in an instant. "Kenzaki-san, how could you do this? I trusted you." Every time he heard their cries, Ryuichi felt a dagger pierce his chest. Losing money was less painful than losing people's trust. That's why Ryuichi left New York and headed west. He could no longer bear the stares of people he knew. 8 months have passed since he came to Los Angeles. At first, he went around with his resume, but the rumors that had flown from Wall Street had already spread. No company would trust him and give him important work. In the end, Ryuichi gave up on finding a job and decided to look for another path. After finishing his job search, Ryuichi walked to a nearby public phone. A Motorola flip phone was already outdated, but even that was a luxury for him. He took a few coins from his pocket and dialed the number of his mother in Japan. It was early in the morning due to the time difference, but his mother was always waiting for his call. "Mom, it's your son." "Yes, I'm doing well." Even in the short call, his voice was infinitely gentle. He could never let his mother know his reality. How could he tell her about going from a vice president at Goldman Sachs to having nothing overnight, or about being kicked out of a glamorous Manhattan penthouse to a small room? Back home, they must still be proud of him as a successful son. How is work? Don't push yourself too hard. His mother's worried voice choked him up. The fact that he was still worrying his mother, even as an adult, tormented him further. But he kept his voice bright. "Yes, I'm fine. A new project is underway, and I'll have good news for you soon." It was a lie, but not a complete lie. Ryuichi actually had a plan. He just lacked the funds and opportunities to execute it. After hanging up, Ryuichi returned to the bench and spent his time. He had a clear daily routine. In the morning, he read various economic newspapers, and after lunch, he carefully listened to the conversations of businessmen passing through the shopping mall. On the surface, he was just killing time, but in reality, he was meticulously gathering information. I don't know what will happen with the next quarter's earnings announcement. There are rumors that WorldCom is also in trouble. Listening to two men talking, Ryuichi quickly calculated in his head. The scale of WorldCom's accounting fraud, its ripple effects, and its impact on other telecommunications companies were all within his expectations. In the afternoon, he headed to a nearby library and used the free internet to analyze the stock market. Sitting in front of an old computer, browsing Yahoo Finance and Bloomberg sites, and analyzing market data, he looked like his past self. He had no money to invest, but the market trends were still vividly drawn in his mind. "Look over there. It's that weird Asian guy again." Ryuichi didn't mind the snickers echoing from afar. He was already used to it. The way people judged him based on his appearance, the mixed glances, and sometimes outright scorn. But he knew. True value comes from within, not from appearance, and he still had something left that could shake the world. In fact, Ryuichi had already made several plans. The first was to take advantage of the changes in the real estate market. He had already sensed that a real estate bubble was forming due to the Federal Reserve's interest rate cuts. The second was the restructuring of the energy market. He saw a significant vacuum in the energy trading market after the oil crisis, which he could exploit. But there was another, more important plan: revenge against the forces that had driven him to ruin. He wasn't driven out of Wall Street by a simple market failure. Someone had intentionally tried to eliminate him, and innocent investors had been harmed in the process. Ryuichi sat on the bench and looked up at the sky. The afternoon sun in Los Angeles was still warm, but a cold determination had settled in his heart, a will to reveal the truth and reclaim everything he had lost someday. As Ryuichi stood up in the evening, shouldering his old backpack, a strange dignity emanated from his back. His spine was still straight, and his steps were filled with confidence. He looked like a lion preparing to rise again, gathering its strength. On his way back to his small room, he stopped by a convenience store and bought ramen and milk. It was enough for dinner. Just a year ago, he had spent $100 on lunch, but now he had learned to endure a day on $3. Poverty had taught him another lesson. However, unbeknownst to Ryuichi, someone was watching him intently. From a cafe on the second floor of the shopping mall, a gaze observed his every move. At Starbucks on the second floor of the shopping mall, the one watching Ryuichi was none other than Hannah Williams. 27 years old, she was one of the most beautiful women in the area. Her blonde hair perfectly waved, and she wore a juicy couture pink velvet tracksuit. Her $399 Ugg boots gleamed, and the Cartier watch on her wrist spoke of her status. As a member of the Williams Group and an heiress, Hannah felt as if everything in the world was at her feet. Isn't he really disgusting? What is he doing sitting there every day? Hannah's voice was filled with blatant disgust. Her friend sitting next to her nodded and giggled. To them, people like Ryuichi were nothing more than an eyesore in this upscale mall, an intruder who dared to step into their world. Why do guys like that come here? What are the security guards doing? Said Brittany, Hannah's friend, irritably. She too came from an upper-class background and had never lived among poor people. To them, someone like Ryuichi was like an alien from another world. Hannah continued to observe Ryuichi while sipping her venti caramel macchiato. In fact, she had seen Ryuichi several times in the past few weeks. He was always sitting in the same seat, eating cheap food, reading newspapers, and observing passers-by, which struck her as peculiar. She was curious about what such a person was doing in this expensive town. Sister, that person is really strange. He wears the same clothes every day, said Jessica, a young woman, pointing at Ryuichi. But Hannah was lost in thought. The look in his eyes was strangely different. It wasn't the look of a pitiful beggar, but something more profound. Just then, Hannah's Motorola flip phone rang. The caller was Brad Hunter, the son of the chairman of Hunter Investments and her boyfriend. Brad, 28, was a typical preppy guy who preferred Abercrombie polo shirts and khaki pants. Hannah, where are you now? I have something important to talk about. Brad's voice had an unusual tension. Hannah hesitated for a moment, then gestured to her friends to go ahead. It seemed like an important conversation. 20 minutes later, Brad appeared at the cafe where Hannah was. Unlike his usual relaxed demeanor, he seemed somewhat anxious. He sat down next to Hannah and lowered his voice, looking around. My father's company is working on a big deal. It's related to your father's company. As Brad explained, Hannah Hannah's expression gradually became serious. Hunter Investments was trying to acquire a division of the Williams Group. However, he said he needed some information in the process. "So, what do you want me to do?" Hannah asked. Brad hesitated for a moment. What he was asking was not simple. He wanted Hannah to access her father's company's internal information and bring out some documents. "This is just business. It'll help both of us, and you know how important our relationship is." Brad's words contained a subtle pressure. It was a threat disguised as love. Hannah thought she loved Brad, but in reality, she was just being used by him. "Brad, this can't happen if we're going to get married. Both our parents have to agree." Brad used the bait of marriage to persuade Hannah. For Hannah, who had been cherished and raised her whole life, marriage with Brad seemed like the most important goal in her life. She hesitated for a long time, but finally nodded. "Okay, but it's not dangerous, is it?" "Of course not. You just need to copy a few files and bring them. No one will know," Brad said reassuringly, but there was a calculating glint in his eyes. He already intended to fully draw Hannah into his plan. After the conversation, Hannah felt conflicted. She thought she was doing it for the man she loved, but a sense of unease settled in the corner of her heart. She looked out the window and saw Ryuichi still sitting on the bench. "He's really disgusting," Hannah muttered unconsciously. It felt as if Ryuichi was peeking into her anxious mind, which made her even more uncomfortable. She suddenly stood up and left the cafe. When Hannah came down to the first floor of the shopping mall, Ryuichi was still sitting in the same seat. He had placed his old backpack beside him and was writing something. Hannah walked past Ryuichi with her friends and said loudly to her boyfriend, "Oh, why is a beggar here? It's unsightly." Her friends followed, giggling, but Ryuichi didn't even look up. He was even more focused on writing something. That sight further angered Hannah. "Hey, what are you doing here? This isn't a place for you to come." Hannah's voice was filled with blatant contempt, but Ryuichi still didn't react. It was as if he was completely ignoring Hannah's very existence. "Can't you hear me?" As Hannah raised her voice even higher, Ryuichi finally looked up. The moment their eyes met, Hannah was momentarily flustered. It was completely different from what she had expected. His eyes weren't dejected or timid, but rather calm and deep. "Excuse me, was I in your way?" Ryuichi's polite reply only angered Hannah further. She felt as if she had become a rude person. "Are you in my way? Your very presence here is in the way. What are you, dirty? Should I marry you?" Hannah's insulting words began to draw glances from the people around them, but Ryuichi remained calm. He quietly stood up and shouldered his backpack. "Excuse me." As Ryuichi left after saying a word, Hannah felt a strange sense of loss. It felt like she hadn't completely won. Rather, she felt like she had lost her dignity. "Sister, that was so satisfying. We need to get rid of guys like that." Her friends clapped, but Hannah's heart was complicated. Ryuichi's last gaze kept replaying in her mind. She had clearly won, so why did she feel this way? That night, Hannah sneaked into her father's office and began searching for the files Brad had requested. They were the quarterly earnings reports and future investment plans of the Williams Group. On the surface, they were simple business documents, but they were extremely important information for competitors. As she copied the files onto a USB drive, Hannah's heart pounded. She was nervous because it was the first time she had done something like this, and she also felt guilty for doing something wrong. But she comforted herself by thinking it was for Brad's future. Hannah was startled by her father's voice, which suddenly echoed. She quickly hit the USB drive and turned around, pretending nothing was wrong. "Dad, Why aren't you asleep yet? Why are you here? What are you doing in the office at this hour? Hannah panicked at her father's suspicious gaze, but thanks to her acting skills, she was able to lie naturally. I needed some business management materials for a university assignment, and you have a lot of good books on your bookshelf. Her father looked at Hannah for a moment, then nodded. He had no reason to doubt her. I see, but don't stay up too late. Your health comes first. After her father left, Hannah breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she hadn't been caught, but she felt like she might be discovered eventually if this continued. But she had already crossed the point of no return. The next day, Hannah met Brad and handed him the USB drive. Brad smiled with satisfaction and kissed Hannah. Thank you, Hannah. Once this is over, we can really get married. But Hannah didn't know that Brad planned to use the files for illegal insider trading and to pin all the blame on Hannah. Hannah, blinded by love, didn't even realize she was falling into a huge trap. And at that very moment, there was another gaze watching this entire situation from afar. It was Ryuichi, the man who had insulted Hannah just the day before. His eyes held a strange glint as he coincidentally witnessed this scene. 3 weeks passed since Hannah handed the USB to Brad. During that time, Hannah lived her life as usual. Every morning she attended yoga class. In the afternoon she went shopping with her friends. And in the evening she had dinner with Brad at a nice restaurant. Everything seemed perfect. But while she didn't know it, a giant investigation net was tightening in the darkness. Investigators from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission had been tracking Hunter Investments' suspicious trading patterns for months. Since the Enron and WorldCom scandals, financial authorities' scrutiny had intensified. In particular, suspicious stock transactions that occurred just before major mergers and acquisitions were under close watch. Traces of clear insider information use were found in transactions related to the Williams Group. The investigative team leader's report contained concrete evidence. The transactions Brad had conducted using the information he received from Hannah, and the digital traces left behind in the process, were all perfectly tracked. That morning, Hannah went to a luxurious spa in Beverly Hills as usual. While receiving a full-body massage, she planned her Napa Valley trip with Brad for the following week. Brad had hinted that he would formally propose there. Hannah was already choosing her wedding dress in her mind. You seem very happy, ma'am. Your expression is so bright. The masseuse's words made Hannah smile. She was truly happy. She was marrying the man she loved, and her father's business was progressing smoothly. Everything was flowing as she had dreamed. After leaving the spa, Hannah headed to Rodeo Drive to meet her friends. Today, they were going to see a new dress at Belladonna. It might even be a dress she could wear to her wedding. Hannah felt cheerful as she gripped the steering wheel of her Ferrari convertible and turned on the music. But the moment she arrived at the shopping mall parking lot, Hannah's world completely collapsed. 3 black SUVs surrounded her car, and men in suits got out one after another. FBI badges gleamed on their chests. Are you Hannah Williams? The investigator's voice was cold and firm. Hannah couldn't understand what was happening for a moment. It was like a scene from a movie. Yes, that's me. But what is this about? We are arresting you on suspicion of violating securities laws. As the investigator read her Miranda rights, Hannah's mind went blank. Arrest, securities laws. She couldn't understand what was happening at all. The surrounding shoppers started taking out their cell phones to take pictures, and Hannah felt true fear for the first time. Wait a minute. This must be a misunderstanding. What did I do? Despite Hannah's screams, the investigators were unmoved. They calmly put handcuffs on her and led her to the SUV. The last thing Hannah saw were the many eyes watching her and the flashes of light. Taken to the FBI's Los Angeles branch, Hannah was left alone in a cold interrogation room. All there was a metal table and chairs under the fluorescent lights and a mirror on the wall. With trembling hands, she tried to call Brad, but her cell phone had already been confiscated. "Please explain what's going on," Hannah shouted, banging on the door, but no one answered. Time just passed meaninglessly. Hannah didn't even care that her juicy couture tracksuit was getting wrinkled. She had never been treated like this in her life. After 2 hours, an investigator finally entered. He placed a thick file on the table and looked at Hannah. "Miss Williams, we have confirmed that you unlawfully obtained confidential information from your father's company last month and transmitted it to a third party." Hannah's face turned pale at the investigator's words. It meant that her relationship with Brad had been exposed. That is, and illegal insider trading using that information resulted in approximately $8 million in unjust profits. This constitutes clear securities fraud. Hannah was shocked by the figure of $8 million. She hadn't known that the files she gave to Brad were used for such a large transaction. She had only thought she was sharing business information. "I don't know anything. Brad Hunter just asked for the documents." "Mr. Brad Hunter is already cooperating with us, and he testified that all responsibility lies with you." At that moment, Hannah's world collapsed. She realized that Brad had betrayed her, that the person who said he loved her and wanted to marry her had trapped her and pinned all the blame on her. "That can't be right. Brad loves me." The investigator's expression didn't change even at Hannah's desperate cry. He took out another document and continued his explanation. "Mr. Hunter claims that you first proposed the transaction. He also says that the majority of the profits were sent to your overseas account." Overseas account. Hannah had never opened such an account, but Brad could easily have created a fake account in her name. She now realized it was a meticulously planned trap. "Now, you have to make a choice. Ms. Williams, do you intend to cooperate, or will you take all the responsibility yourself?" The investigator's cold voice echoed in the interrogation room. Hannah realized for the first time how naive she had been, and that she had been completely used by Brad. That night, Hannah spent her time in a cold prison cell. The orange prisoner's uniform, which she had to wear instead of juicy couture, symbolized her miserable reality. She couldn't believe that she, who had been dreaming of getting married just a few hours ago, was now a criminal. Dad. Hannah thought of her father for the first time. How disappointed he would be to hear this news. What kind of blow would it be to the Williams Group? The fact that it was all her own foolishness weighed heavily on her. Outside, the media was already in a frenzy. "Famous heiress arrested on suspicion of insider trading" was the headline on every newspaper's front page. Along with Hannah's photo, news of the Williams Group's stock price plummeting was also reported. But unbeknownst to Hannah, someone was meticulously watching her situation. It was Ryuichi, the man who had insultingly demeaned her just a few days prior. He had a complex expression as he read the newspaper article. Was this an opportunity for revenge? Or was it time to realize justice? 4 days passed since Hannah's arrest. In the cold, solitary cell of the Los Angeles County Jail, she tried to accept her reality. A sense of despair she had never experienced in her life overwhelmed her. The orange prisoner's uniform was a cruel dividing line between her glamorous past and her dark present. The inside of the jail was far more miserable than Hannah had imagined. The smell of mold on the walls, the cold concrete floor, and the muffled voices of other inmates from beyond the bars. All of this was hell to her. Just a few days ago, she had slept on silk sheets and Egyptian cotton duvets. On the first night, Hannah couldn't sleep. The hard bed and thin blanket couldn't keep out the cold, and above all, Brad's betrayal kept replaying in her mind. How could the man who said he loved her betray her so thoroughly? How could the man who said they should go choose wedding rings have been planning to trap her all along? A request for visitation was made. Hannah jumped at the jailer's voice. Perhaps her father had come, or maybe Brad would come and say it was all a misunderstanding. But the person who appeared in the visiting room was completely unexpected. It was the legal team leader of the Williams Group, John Parker, the lawyer who had always played the role of her father's right-hand man. Seeing his cold expression, Hannah sensed the worst. "Miss Williams, I've come to deliver the chairman's message." The warmth was gone from Lawyer Parker's voice. It was as if he were speaking to a complete stranger. "What did Father say?" Hannah's trembling question was met with a moment of hesitation from Parker, but he soon opened his mouth with a calm expression. "The chairman has decided to cut off all contact with you, Miss Williams, for the time being. He has also said that he will begin the process of revoking your inheritance rights." The moment those words fell, Hannah's world collapsed once again. The reality that even her father had abandoned her tore at her heart. Did Father really say that? I want to explain it to him directly. The chairman is currently hospitalized. He had a heart problem due to the shock of this incident. Hannah's head spun. She realized that her foolishness had even harmed her father's health. The Williams Group's stock price had already plummeted, and the reputation built over decades had been destroyed overnight. "Annie told me to give you this." Parker handed her an envelope. Inside were Hannah's credit cards and bank cards. All of them were frozen. Hannah no longer had money to hire a lawyer or to pay bail. It would be best to apply for a public defender. With Parker's cold advice, the visit ended. Hannah returned to her solitary cell and sat on the floor. The reality of being truly alone now hit her forcefully. That night, Hannah reflected on her past for the first time. The people she had ignored and looked down on while living a life of luxury one by one came to mind. In particular, the words she had spoken to the Japanese man at the shopping mall a few days ago kept replaying in her mind. "What are you, dirty? Should I marry you?" She now realized how arrogant and cruel she had been. He was probably someone's precious family member, someone with dreams and hopes. But to her, he had just seemed inferior. On the second day, Hannah had the opportunity to use a payphone at the jail, but she was at a loss about who to call. Her friends had already cut ties. Brad was a betrayer, and her father was hospitalized. In the end, Hannah called her college roommate, Jennifer. But Jennifer's voice on the other end was cold. "Hannah, where are you calling from now?" "Jenny, I'm really having a hard time right now. Can you help me?" After a moment of silence, Jennifer's reply came back. "Hannah, I'm sorry, but I'm busy with my own work. And honestly, what you did is really disappointing." The call ended there. Hannah chuckled wryly, lowering her head. She realized how superficial all the relationships surrounding her had been. At the same time, in a small library in downtown Los Angeles, Ryuichi was reading a newspaper article with meticulous care. He read every article related to Hannah's arrest without exception. He also collected materials on Brad Hunter and Hunter Investments. A strange glint appeared in Ryuichi's eyes. Was this an opportunity for revenge? Or was it time to realize justice? 4 days had passed since Hannah's arrest. In the cold, solitary cell of the Los Angeles County Jail, she tried to accept her reality. A sense of despair she had never experienced in her life overwhelmed her. The orange prisoner's uniform was a cruel dividing line between her glamorous past and her dark present. The inside of the jail was far more miserable than Hannah had imagined. The smell of mold on the walls, the cold concrete floor, and all of this was hell to her. Just a few days ago, she had slept on silk sheets and Egyptian cotton duvets. On the first night, Hannah couldn't sleep. The hard bed and thin blanket couldn't keep out the cold. And above all, Brad's betrayal kept replaying in her mind. How could the man who said he loved her betray her so thoroughly? How could the man who said they should go choose wedding rings have been planning to trap her all along? A request for visitation was made. Hannah jumped at the jailer's voice. Perhaps her father had come, or maybe Brad would come and say it was all a misunderstanding. But the person who appeared in the visiting room was completely unexpected. It was the legal team leader of the Williams Group, John Parker, the lawyer who had always played the role of her father's right-hand man. Seeing his cold expression, Hannah sensed the worst. "Miss Williams, I've come to deliver the chairman's message." The warmth was gone from Lawyer Parker's voice. It was as if he were speaking to a complete stranger. What did Father say? Hannah's trembling question was met with a moment of hesitation from Parker, but he soon opened his mouth with a calm expression. "The chairman has decided to cut off all contact with you, Miss Williams, for the time being. He has also said that he will begin the process of revoking your inheritance rights." The moment those words fell, Hannah's world collapsed once again. The reality that even her father had abandoned her tore at her heart. Did Father really say that? I want to explain it to him directly. The chairman is currently hospitalized. He had a heart problem due to the shock of this incident. Hannah's head spun. She realized that her foolishness had even harmed her father's health. The Williams Group's stock price had already plummeted, and the reputation built over decades had been destroyed overnight. "And he told me to give you this." Parker handed her an envelope. Inside were Hannah's credit cards and bank cards. All of them were frozen. Hannah no longer had money to hire a lawyer or to pay bail. It would be best to apply for a public defender. With Parker's cold advice, the visit ended. Hannah returned to her solitary cell and sat on the floor. The reality of being truly alone now hit her forcefully. That night, Hannah reflected on her past for the first time. The people she had ignored and looked down on while living a life of luxury one by one came to mind. In particular, the words she had spoken to the Japanese man at the shopping mall a few days ago kept replaying in her mind. "What are you, dirty? Should I marry you?" She now realized how arrogant and cruel she had been. He was probably someone's precious family member, someone with dreams and hopes. But to her, he had just seemed inferior. On the second day, Hannah had the opportunity to use a payphone at the jail, but she was at a loss about who to call. Her friends had already cut ties. Brad was a betrayer, and her father was hospitalized. In the end, Hannah called her college roommate, Jennifer, but Jennifer's voice on the other end was cold. "Hannah, where are you calling from now?" "Jenny, I'm really having a hard time right now. Can you help me?" After a moment of silence, Jennifer's reply came back. "Hannah, I'm sorry, but I'm busy with my own work. And honestly, what you did is really disappointing." The call ended there. Hannah chuckled wryly, lowering her head. She realized how superficial all the relationships surrounding her had been. At the same time, in a small library in downtown Los Angeles, Ryuichi was reading a newspaper article with meticulous care. He read every article related to Hannah's arrest without exception. He also collected materials on Brad Hunter and Hunter Investments. A strange glint appeared in Ryuichi's eyes. Was this an opportunity for revenge, or was it time to realize justice? Hannah had insulted him. Considering that, just watching her fall would have been enough. But something felt incomplete. He analyzed the case based on his own experience. The structure of the insider trading, the flow of money, and Brad's behavior patterns all suggested that Hannah was likely just being was one of the forces that had manipulated things behind the scenes when he fell. At the time, he couldn't act without concrete evidence, but this time, he might be able to reveal everything. Ryuichi sat in front of the library's computer and searched for Hunter Investments' past transaction records. He also gathered non-public information by utilizing his connections in the financial industry. In the process, surprising facts emerged one by one. Hunter Investments had preyed on numerous companies over the past decade. They repeatedly used methods such as bribing insiders, extorting information, and using it for unfair profits. Hannah was merely their latest victim. This is enough to turn things around, Ryuichi muttered to himself. By utilizing his expertise and experience, he could save Hannah and expose the Hunter family's true crimes at the same time. But the question was his motive. Why should he help the woman who had insulted him? Ryuichi recalled his encounter with Hannah a few days earlier. Her arrogant attitude and insulting words were still vivid in his ears. But at the same time, he also remembered her eyes. On the surface, she seemed arrogant, but beneath the surface, there seemed to be loneliness and anxiety. A child who had everything from a young age, but had never received true love. Ryuichi objectively analyzed Hannah's situation. Raised under her parents' protection, she had never had the chance to know what the real world was like, and it was somewhat natural that she was completely deceived by a narcissist like Brad. Ryuichi reflected on his own past. When he was successful on Wall Street, he hadn't been much different from Hannah. He had ignored others due to money and power, and he now knew that that arrogance had ultimately led to his downfall. Revenge and justice. Where was the dividing line? Ryuichi fell into deep thought. If he left Hannah as she was, she would become Brad's scapegoat and spend a long time in prison. But if he helped her, he could not only punish the real villains, but also complete his own revenge. That night, Ryuichi thought for a long time in his small room. Outside the window, the neon signs of Los Angeles shone, but his heart remained complicated. However, by dawn, he had finally made up his mind to save Hannah Williams, not for revenge or personal gain, but to realize justice. A week had passed since Hannah's arrest. The routine at the Los Angeles County Jail was a brutal reality check for her. Waking up at 5 a.m. every morning, the cold, hard concrete floor, and the harsh curses and threatening stares of other inmates. For her, who had only ever been accustomed to silk and Egyptian cotton, it was all hell. The conversations with her public defender were always filled with despair. Hannah also experienced more frustration than hope during her first meeting with the public defender. The overworked young lawyer glanced through Hannah's case and gave her only realistic advice. Frankly, it's a difficult case to win. The evidence is too clear. At the public defender's cold judgment, Hannah was losing her last hope. Just then, the door to the jail's visiting room opened and an unexpected person appeared. Hannah didn't recognize him at first. His perfectly tailored Armani suit, Hermes tie, and Italian handmade shoes were all of the highest quality. But the moment she saw his face closely, Hannah's heart stopped. "How did you get here?" Ryuichi smiled calmly at Hannah's trembling voice. The shabby appearance from the shopping mall bench just a week ago was nowhere to be seen. He looked like a completely different person now. "I am Ryuichi Kenzaki. I will be your attorney from now on." The moment Ryuichi handed her his business card, Hannah was even more shocked. The card read, "Ryuichi Kenzaki, Harvard Law School graduate, New York attorney." The person she had dismissed as a beggar was a Harvard-educated lawyer. What kind of joke is this? Ryuichi sat calmly in a chair at Hannah's flustered reaction. He placed a thick stack of documents on the table and began to explain. "This is no joke. I am a qualified attorney, and I have decided to take on your case but she had no money to pay for a lawyer. Her father had frozen all her accounts. Let's talk about money later. The priority now is to get you out of here. Hannah was taken aback by Ryuichi's firm words, but she had no choice but to rely on him, so she decided not to ask any further questions. Ryuichi spread out the documents and began a thorough analysis of the case. As she listened to his professional explanation, Hannah's expression gradually changed to surprise. This person was no ordinary lawyer. He had a keen insight into the complexities of the financial industry and the mechanisms of insider trading. Looking at the evidence presented by the prosecution, there are clearly manipulated parts. Especially the documents related to the overseas account are suspicious. Ryuichi pointed out the problems one by one as he turned over the documents. His analytical skills were truly at an expert level. Hannah began to feel hope. Can you really help me? Of course, but there are conditions. Hannah tensed at Ryuichi's words. What kind of conditions? You must follow all my instructions from now on, and you must honestly tell me everything you know about Brad Hunter and his father. Hannah hesitated for a moment. Talking about Brad was still painful, but now that she knew how he had used her, she finally nodded. Okay, I'll tell you everything. From that day on, Ryuichi began a full-scale investigation. During the day, he visited prosecutors' offices and courthouses to review documents, and in the evening, he met with Hannah to confirm detailed information. As she watched his meticulous preparations, Hannah gradually felt a sense of relief. Ryuichi dug into Brad's past achievements. He tracked down one suspicious transaction after another that Hunter Investments had conducted over the past few years. In the process, a surprising fact emerged. Brad had been using this method for a long time. He approached women from wealthy families, extracted confidential information under the guise of love, and then blamed them for all the problems. Hannah was his fifth victim. What happened to these women? Ryuichi's lips curved into a bitter smile at Hannah's question. Most of them ended up settling. Their families paid large sums of money to avoid scandal and resolved the matter quietly. The moment she heard those words, Hannah's whole body trembled with anger. She realized anew what a calculating and wicked person Brad was. Ryuichi also traced how Hannah's overseas account had been created. He found evidence that Brad had used Hannah's personal information to create false documents and open an account in her name. This is enough to turn things around, Ryuichi said with confidence. Hannah finally smiled for the first time, but at the same time, a question arose. By the way, I'm really curious. Who are you? Why are you helping me? Ryuichi was silent for a moment at Hannah's question. Then, looking out the window, he slowly opened his mouth. I used to work on Wall Street. I was a vice president at Goldman Sachs, and behind my downfall was your boyfriend's father. Hannah gasped at Ryuichi's words. She couldn't believe that Brad's father was connected to Ryuichi's downfall. Mr. Hunter Sr. used every means to destroy the Asian fund I was in charge of at the time. He spread false information, bribed investors, and forced them to withdraw their funds. Listening to Ryuichi's explanation, Hannah felt all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. So, that's why Ryuichi is trying to help me, for revenge. Then am I just a tool for revenge? Hannah asked anxiously. Ryuichi shook his head. At first, that was my intention, but not anymore. You are a victim of Hunter Investments. You are someone whose life has been ruined by their greed, just like me. Hannah felt a sense of relief at Ryuichi's sincere words. At the same time, she felt apologetic. She was so grateful that he was helping her even after she had insulted him so terribly. I'm sorry. It's okay. What's important now is what happens next. Ryuichi calmly accepted Hannah's apology. However, deep in his heart, complex emotions were swirling. 2 days later, Ryuichi finally found conclusive evidence. A bank statement proving that the actual beneficiary of the transaction conducted by Brad using Hannah was someone else. It was clear evidence that all the money had flowed into Hunter Investments' secret account. Now, it's time for counterattack. Ryuichi's eyes were filled with conviction. The revenge he had prepared for a long time was finally about to begin. But it was not just a personal revenge. It was also about realizing justice. Hannah now fully understood that Ryuichi was not just a lawyer. He was an expert who knew the darkness of the financial world better than anyone, and at the same time, he was a victim like herself. And above all, he was someone who knew what true justice was. The courtroom of the Los Angeles Federal Court was filled with tension. It was the day of Hannah Williams' trial. The media had already prepared sensational headlines about the downfall of a famous heiress, and the gallery was packed with curious eyes. Everyone accepted Hannah's guilt as a foregone conclusion. On the prosecution side stood veteran federal prosecutor Michael Roberts. He had a track record of successfully prosecuting the Enron and WorldCom cases. The media had already declared his victory. The story of a privileged person like Hannah facing the judgment of the law was perfect material to appease public anger. However, the moment Ryuichi appeared as the defense attorney, the atmosphere in the courtroom subtly changed. In his perfectly tailored navy suit, with a confident posture and organizing his documents, he looked no different from a partner at a top law firm. He was clearly no ordinary person. "Please introduce yourself, counsel." At the judge's request, Ryuichi stood up. "I am Ryuichi Kenzaki. I am a graduate of Harvard Law School and hold a license to practice law in New York State." His simple yet imposing introduction caused a stir in the gallery. It was surprising that a Harvard graduate would take on such a case. Prosecutor Roberts smiled confidently and began reading his opening statement. The evidence proving Hannah's guilt seemed perfect. Brad's testimony, the transaction records of the overseas account, and the confidential documents that Hannah had personally brought out all pointed to her guilt. The defendant, Hannah Williams, leaked confidential information from her father's company for personal gain. This is a clear act of securities fraud. Prosecutor Roberts' logical and eloquent opening statement captivated the gallery. However, Ryuichi was completely unfazed. He calmly took notes and analyzed the opponent's logic. Brad was called to the witness stand as the prosecution's first witness. He testified according to a perfectly prepared script. He testified that Hannah had first proposed the transaction and had led the entire plan. Brad's acting was very natural. He looked like a true victim. Hannah was the first to suggest selling her father's company's information. Hannah clenched her fists in anger at Brad's testimony. However, Ryuichi remained calm. He keenly observed Brad, waiting for his opportunity to rebut. Finally, it was time for Ryuichi's cross-examination. He slowly stood up and looked at Brad. At that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom was filled with tension. "Mr. Hunter, since when did you start dating the defendant?" "Since around December of last year." "So, you've been dating for about 10 months, is that correct?" "Have you talked about marriage during that period?" Brad hesitated for a moment. He didn't know where this question was leading. "Yes, we have." Ryuichi nodded and asked the next question. "That's interesting. By the way, Mr. Hunter, do you know what the commonality is among the women you've dated over the past 3 years?" Roberts protested. "Objection. Irrelevant question." However, the judge shook his head. "It seems relevant. Please continue." Ryuichi smiled and took out some documents. Turning to the gallery, he said, They were all heiresses of large corporations, and all of them were indicted on suspicion of leaking confidential information after their relationship with Mr. Hunter. The courtroom began to buzz. Brad's face turned pale. Ryuichi continued to present bombshell evidence. Brad's past similar methods, and the fact that he had blamed the women for all the responsibility each time. The courtroom gradually shifted to Ryuichi's pace. And this is the conclusive evidence. Ryuichi projected the bank transaction records onto the large screen. It was clear evidence that the money deposited into the overseas account under Hannah's name had actually flowed into Hunter Investments' secret account. The defendant did not receive a single cent. All the money was embezzled by Hunter Investments. The moment this evidence was revealed, the courtroom was completely overturned. Brad hastily tried to get off the witness stand and began to stumble. Roberts's face also turned pale. Ryuichi didn't stop there. He had a bigger picture in mind. Your Honor, the true victim in this case is Hannah Williams. She was merely used under the guise of love. Ryuichi's closing argument overwhelmed the entire courtroom. His logic was perfect, and the evidence was clear. There was no room for doubt. The judge immediately issued an arrest warrant for Brad Hunter, and all charges against Hannah were dropped. Defendant Hannah Williams is immediately released. The courtroom was filled with applause. The moment the judge's gavel fell, Hannah looked at Ryuichi with disbelief. She was truly free, but there was another, even greater shock. As she watched Brad being handcuffed as he left the courtroom, Hannah felt a complex emotion. It still hurt that the person she had once loved had so thoroughly betrayed her. Is it over? Hannah asked. Ryuichi shook his head. This is just the beginning. The real culprits are elsewhere. Ryuichi's eyes held a bigger plan. Brad was just a small fish. The real big fish was Hunter Sr. That evening, the news was filled with this case. Heiress arrested for insider trading was the headline on every broadcast station. However, Hannah had mixed feelings. She had regained her freedom, but she had also lost a lot. Her relationship with her father, her friendships, and above all, her pure self, had all changed through this incident. Aren't you regretting it? When Hannah asked Ryuichi, he was silent for a moment. The revenge has just begun, but you are free now. That's enough. Ryuichi's words held a deep meaning. He had saved Hannah, but his true purpose was elsewhere, and there was still a long way to go to achieve that purpose. 3 days after Brad's arrest, the entire Los Angeles was abuzz with shocking news. The FBI raided the headquarters of Hunter Investments. The search, which began at 6 a.m., continued until the afternoon, and dozens of boxes of documents were loaded onto trucks. The curtain was about to rise on the largest financial fraud investigation in Wall Street history. Ryuichi calmly watched all these developments. The evidence he had gathered over the past few months had been transmitted to the FBI. It was a perfect file containing the full scope of all the crimes Hunter Investments had committed over the past 15 years. Insider trading, corporate manipulation, investor fraud, even bribery. Everything was recorded in detail. A tense meeting was held in Hunter Sr.'s mansion. He, who had been confident his entire life, was also in a panic this time. The arrest of his son, Brad, was a shock. But a bigger problem was that the FBI had begun to expose his past crimes as well. Who on earth gathered all this information? Hunter Sr. shouted at his lawyers and associates, but no one could give a clear answer. It was rare for someone to create such a thorough and systematic investigative file. It had to be someone who understood the intricacies of the financial industry and also had a perfect understanding of legal procedures. Ryuichi smiled as he read the newspaper in his Beverly Hills hotel. The news of Hunter Investments' raid was on the front page. Everything he had planned was executed perfectly. But this was just the beginning. Hannah stayed at the hotel, going through a confusing time. Legally, she was free, but she still couldn't contact her father, and all her accounts were frozen. Above all, the process of realizing how naive she had been was painful. She watched the downfall of the man she had insulted, reading the newspaper Ryuichi had given her. The news of Brad's father also being investigated by the FBI filled her with mixed emotions. On one hand, it was satisfying, but on the other hand, everything was happening so fast that she felt dizzy. 2 days later, an even bigger bombshell exploded. Hunter Sr. was arrested. The charges were organized securities fraud and money laundering. The FBI announced that they had found an astonishing $2 billion in illegal funds from the secret accounts he operated. The full scope of organized financial crime, which had continued for 30 years, was revealed. The FBI investigators' briefing shocked the financial world. It turned out that Hunter Investments was not just a simple insider trading operation, but had run a massive criminal organization. Their victims numbered in the hundreds, and the scale of the damage reached tens of billions of dollars. Ryuichi quietly watched all these developments, feeling satisfied. He had experienced the pain and despair he had felt during his own downfall, and now Hunter was experiencing the same. But he also knew that this was not just a personal revenge. It was a process of seeking justice for countless victims. The arrest of Hunter Sr. was broadcast live on all television channels. The sight of him, who had enjoyed power and wealth his entire life, walking with handcuffs on, his head bowed, was symbolic. Many people felt a sense of catharsis watching this scene. In the chairman's office of the Williams Group, Hannah's father was watching the TV with a complicated expression. He had heard that his daughter had been released innocent, but he still hadn't contacted her. Pride and regret were intertwined. Chairman, it has been fully proven that Miss Hannah is innocent. At his secretary's report, Chairman Williams let out a deep sigh. He realized how hastily he had abandoned his daughter, but the wound had already deepened. Hannah was waiting for her father's contact in the hotel room. The legal issues had been resolved, but the relationship with her family remained strained. Above all, she needed time to reflect on her own naivety and arrogance. Ryuichi judged that it was time to reveal his true identity to the world. He proposed exclusive interviews with major media outlets. It was time to let the world know who the true protagonist behind the exposure of Hunter Investments' crimes was. My name is Ryuichi Kenzaki. I am a former vice president of Goldman Sachs and a direct victim of Hunter Investments' crimes. Ryuichi's interview surprised all the media. The identity of the informant, who had been a mystery until then, was revealed. What was even more surprising was the fact that he had also served as Hannah's attorney. I started for revenge, but I wanted to end it by realizing justice. Many people were moved by Ryuichi's words. He was praised for transcending personal grievances to achieve social justice. The downfall of the Hunter family was not just the ruin of a single family. Countless corrupt politicians and businessmen connected to them were also investigated one after another. A chain reaction occurred, as if in a domino effect. Brad, hearing the news of his father's arrest in prison, was completely devastated. He had lived his whole life believing in his father's power, but it had all crumbled in an instant. Only then did he realize how many people he had hurt, but it was already too late. Hannah felt a new emotion as she watched Ryuichi's interview. She learned that the man who had saved her was not just a lawyer, but a true hero who had fought against the Hunter family. At the same time, she realized how foolish she had been. I would like to express my gratitude to attorney Ryuichi Kenzaki. Hannah also held a press conference to officially apologize and express her gratitude. In particular, she sincerely apologized for how she had treated him in the past. Ryuichi watched Hana's apology on television with mixed emotions. Revenge had been completed, but he had learned many things in the process. That forgiveness is stronger than revenge, and justice is stronger than revenge. Hunter Investments ultimately went bankrupt, and all its assets were used to compensate the victims. Ryuichi was also able to recover the money of the investors he had lost. Most importantly, he had the opportunity to apologize to them sincerely. As all these events concluded, Ryuichi gained the greatest lesson in his life. That true victory is not about destroying the opponent, but about correcting what is wrong. And Hana, whom he had met in that process, was also a valuable learning opportunity for him. 2 months had passed since the complete downfall of Hunter Investments. Los Angeles gradually returned to peace, and this case was recorded in the history of the financial industry as a case of justice realized. But for the true protagonists of the story, a new beginning awaited. Ryuichi was once again at a turning point in his life. Revenge had been completed, and justice had been realized. All that remained for him was to search for his true dream. He returned all the money recovered from the Hunter family to its original owners, and the sincere gratitude he received in the process warmed his heart. Mr. Kenzaki, thank you so much. Thanks to you, our family can stand up again. As he received the tearful greetings from the pastor of the Japanese Association, Ryuichi felt true fulfillment. He had recovered precious values that money could not buy. Hana had spent the past few months reflecting on herself. Her relationship with her father had not been fully restored, but they were slowly opening their hearts to each other. Most importantly, she realized how much she had lived with a sense of entitlement and was trying to change it. A cautious meeting between father and daughter took place in the chairman's office of Williams Group. Facing each other for the first time in months, awkwardness and regret coexisted between them. However, the love they had for each other remained unchanged. Dad, I was really wrong. I was so foolish. Hana's sincere apology brought tears to Chairman Williams's eyes. He felt that his daughter had truly grown through the ordeal she had experienced. I'm sorry, too. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you during your most difficult time. The reconciliation between father and daughter was a quiet but deeply moving moment. It showed that sometimes trials can make people stronger and relationships deeper. Hana was now working as an intern at her father's company, diligently learning the business. She started under the same conditions as other employees, without the privilege she had before. It was difficult at first, but she gradually began to enjoy the work. Miss Hana, your report today was really well done. Hana felt a sense of real accomplishment with each compliment she received from her colleagues. She realized for the first time how proud it was to be recognized for her abilities, not for her money or status. Ryuichi started a new challenge. He decided to establish a non-profit organization to provide legal services for the disadvantaged. He wanted to give back to society with his expertise and experience. He decided to focus on helping victims of financial fraud. A financial world with justice. Ryuichi's slogan resonated with people. Lawyers and financial experts with kind hearts volunteered to join his organization. Although his income was much lower than what he had earned on Wall Street, he was happier than ever before. On a warm autumn afternoon, Ryuichi and Hana coincidentally met at the famous Beverly Hills shopping mall. It was the very place where everything had begun. Both of them remembered that day and wore complex expressions. I'm truly sorry about that time. I was too arrogant. Hana apologized sincerely again. Although the insult on that day had ultimately become the catalyst for her salvation, she still felt a great deal of regret. It's okay. Rather, I am grateful. Thanks to you, my life was able to find a new direction." Hannah felt relieved by Ryuichi's warm reply, and at the same time, she felt respect. His personality, who could not only forgive but also express gratitude to the person who had insulted him, was truly amazing. "If you don't mind, can I volunteer at your organization? I want to do something meaningful too." Ryuichi was surprised for a moment by Hannah's proposal, but he soon smiled and nodded. "Of course, your experience will also be of great help to other victims." And so, they became new partners, overcoming the scars of the past. The enemy became a colleague, and insult became a stepping stone for growth. A surprising transformation. A few months later, Ryuichi's legal center was established as an essential organization in the community. Hannah found new meaning in her life by advising and assisting victims of financial fraud there. Although it was a completely different life from her past glamorous one, it was a much more rewarding life. Brad was sentenced to a long prison term, and Hunter Sr. also spent his years in prison. However, the victims of the crimes they committed were all able to receive appropriate compensation. Justice was delayed, but eventually realized. The Williams Group became more transparent and ethical in its management after this incident. Her father used his daughter's ordeal as a lesson and improved the company's governance structure. And Hannah was preparing to one day take over the company and make it an even better enterprise. One evening, Ryuichi sat alone on the bench of the shopping mall where he had first met Hannah. This time, he was wearing a neat suit instead of old clothes and drinking a warm coffee instead of a convenience store sandwich. Everything had changed, but that seat still held a special meaning for him. "Everything is connected," Ryuichi muttered to himself. If Hannah hadn't insulted him, he probably would have continued to decline. But that insult evoked anger. Anger led to a desire for revenge, and revenge was ultimately channeled into realizing justice. And in that process, he was able to find his true self. Hannah, too, would have lived her whole life with that sense of entitlement, if not for Brad's betrayal. But through the ordeal, she was able to truly grow, and is now living a meaningful life, helping others. Sometimes, life's greatest wounds can become the starting point for its greatest blessings. At the moment they were insulted, neither Ryuichi nor Hannah could have imagined what the outcome would be. But they overcame their trials in their own ways, became better people, and were able to start new lives. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Ryuichi is still fighting for justice, and Hannah is learning what true success is. And their story became a lesson for many, showing what forgiveness, growth, and true justice are. Sometimes we are tempted to judge or ignore others carelessly. But if we remember this story, we can realize how dangerous it is to judge people by their appearance, and that true value lies not in money or status, but in humanity and a sense of justice. Ryuichi and Hannah's story ends here, but the stories of all of us continue. How you treat the people you meet today and the choices you make are all up to you. A small act of kindness can change someone's life, and a small act of neglect can lead to unexpected consequences. Thank you for watching the long video today. If you write "fight" in the comments, it will be a great help in creating daily